Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Preparing Your Website for the upcoming President's Management Agenda webinar today. I'm your host, Doug Mashkuri, Vice President and General Manager of GovLoop, and I am very excited to be your moderator today. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Mighty Citizen, for helping us support this great trip. April is a week away. In addition to warmer weather, you can also anticipate the Biden administration's Presidential Management Agenda. This agenda will lay out the administration's strategy for improving how agencies can serve their constituents and carry out their missions. Once the agenda is released, agencies will have to quickly, and I emphasize quickly, update their websites and digital services to reflect the new direction. Today, we have an awesome lineup of speakers of industry and government experts who are going to talk to us how your agency can transition its website to reflect the PMA and update legacy systems in the process. Before we do that, let's jump into a few housekeeping items. First, if you're on Twitter, please share what you're learning using the hashtag GLTrain. We have some great resources available for you on the console, so make sure to check those out and download them. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties. We know how hard it could be with our different bandwidth, so if you do have any problems, submit your issue into the Ask a Question tab, and my associate, Maddie, will help you get you back up and running. This is also the same place where you can ask questions of our esteemed panel, so please do that as well. Lastly, we are recording this training, and we'll email you a link to the entire session tomorrow, so if you'd like to watch it again, pass along to colleagues, you'll have that email in your inbox tomorrow. All right, with that, let's get to our all-star panel and do some introductions. I feel like we should have some walk-on music, but we're not going to do that because of the trademark and copyrights, and this would be very expensive. So let's just get to it. And I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get this correct. First, we have Tina Pemberton. Tina is the digital platform lead at the Federal Student Aid Office. Tina is responsible for FSA's digital platform, which includes studentaid.gov website and My Student Aid mobile app that serves millions of students, parents, and borrowers. Tina has served in the federal government for more than 25 years. Next up, also from FSA, we have Tate Chamberlain. As FSA's lead UX designer, Tate oversees the user experience of federal student aid applicants, parents, and borrowers on studentaid.gov and the My Student Aid app. Prior to his work at FSA, Tate was an Open Data Fellow at the University of Michigan School of Information. Next, we have Stephen Tidmore. Stephen is the Vice President of Technology at Mighty Citizen. Stephen has become a webmaster. Stephen became a webmaster at the University of Texas before joining Mighty Citizen in 2012. Last but surely not least, we have Mike Steckel. Mike is a User Experience Director at Mighty Citizen. Mike oversees a team of information architects and online marketers during every stage of the company's projects, from the early days of discovery and research through content strategy, and eventually the launching and testing. Panel, welcome. I'm so excited for you guys to tell the story today. So we got a lot of information to cover, and we're going to go fast, but not too fast. So let's just open it up right away. Tina, first question is for you. How are agencies currently updating their websites in response to new initiatives and improvements?
Sure, and I want to thank you for having invited me to join you today, and I look forward to today's panel conversation. I'm happy to talk about at Federal Student Aid, we have often found that we need to be able to respond quickly to new initiatives or requirements. And a really good example that I'm sure has probably impacted just about every government website manager is the recent pandemic. As an organization, we really had to go from like 0 to 60 in response to the pandemic. And that was based on new legislation and administrative guidance. Our organization had to rapidly shift to provide temporary relief to millions of student loan borrowers, which included halting loan payments and shifting borrowers to a 0% interest rate. From a website perspective, we participated in a cross-organizational team that had to quickly determine how to implement the new guidance. We rapidly developed an announcement and informational content for customers. We reviewed all the site content and tools that were impacted by these changes, and we identified priority areas that needed updates. We also had to work in concert with our communications teams who are managing outreach to those borrowers to ensure that our website was updated so they had a place to point customers to resources and information. And lastly, we had to work with our loan servicers to provide guidance for updating their website content and to coordinate customer communication. And so I think your question was around how do we, prepare for change? And this was a situation where we had massive change without much time to get ready. But it also helped demonstrate to our team and to the organization that we really can make these kinds of significant changes if we have the support of leadership and also the ability to prioritize resources in terms of both staffing and financial resources as well. And I think one of the good takeaways from this was many of the lessons that we learned and the steps that we followed really helped shape a framework that we could leverage in the future as we see new initiatives or if we see changes in priorities so that we can be responsive to these sorts of activities in the future.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think it's a testament to the infrastructure and discipline you've already had built that when this mass change comes, you're ready for it and can manage it. You're not worried about getting up to speed. It's just speeding up. So congratulations. I know it's a huge undertaking that you went through. For our friends with Mighty Citizen, the President Management Agenda, it's a huge mandate. Agencies are eagerly anticipating this. What are a few tips on how can agencies be thinking about prioritizing their website modernizations as they're waiting for the mandates to come out?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Let me say first, if you're not familiar with Mighty Citizen, we're a branding, marketing, digital communications firm for government agencies and other mission-driven organizations. So our focus is always on increasing the impact to better serve the public. So we like to kind of marry data and design and technology to create messaging, websites, and various public service campaigns that improve the world. And as far as getting ready for the changes we know are coming, I'm really urging agencies to take a step back and use aligning to the PMA as an opportunity to kind of supercharge your user experience efforts. So we have a paper in the resources section where we kind of outline a process where you can basically create an audit, a content audit. And I'll talk about this a lot today, but it's a very simple spreadsheet that can help you organize for the PMA as well as get you ready for making other kinds of improvements so that you're a lot more nimble when unexpected changes might land. So this is a great opportunity for you to kind of not only hit your PMA recommendations, but also move on to kind of organize yourself so you see your site as a whole and you can start having conversations across silos, and all of these things can come out of building that audit.
Yeah.
I'll also jump in here just to say that, I'm on the technology side, and so I'm going to obviously recommend that any security recommendations, security modernizations need to be taken very seriously and tackled quickly, as well as accessibility fixes. That may need to happen on your site. Sometimes that can be part of a content audit or a larger accessibility audit. But also just on the content update side, you may want to look at this as an opportunity to put a system in place that makes it easier to manage content in the future. If you figure out that once you do a content audit and it's difficult to make content changes that you need to make based on the PMA, ideally, you should be able to update a particular piece of content in one place, and then that should, go out to everywhere it needs to be updated across multiple pages or even multiple websites or applications where that content appears. And I'd also recommend, along with that, maybe some basic accessibility training for content administrators if that hasn't been done previously. It's a great opportunity to kind of tackle those holistic things as well.
Yeah, so we kind of have a methodology of create once, publish everywhere, and it sounds very similar.
Let's
get it.
That's my mantra. Cope.
Right.
Let's cope. Awesome. All right, before we go to our next question, why don't we go to our first poll question for our audience? We would love to get your thoughts on this. So here's the question. Is your agency anticipating updating its website for the PMA? Yes, no, somewhat, unsure. There's no right or wrong here, but this input could help us help you. So once again, is your agency anticipating updating its website for the PMA? Yes, no, somewhat, or unsure. Give it 2 seconds. And Maddie, if you want to go ahead and push the results out. So we have a high level of unsure here, about 68%. So that's, I think there's some tips and tricks and best practices we can share today on kind of how to be ready for the PMA and what questions we should be asking to make sure we're ready. All right, so let's jump into agencies and resource management. And, with any change, there's always barriers, there's obstacles in place. So, why don't we throw this out, and we'll start with Tate. What are the biggest barriers to overcome when updating resources in anticipation of new legislation?
Yeah, when you're thinking about anticipating something that you're unsure about, right? How do you prep for that? I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned, besides the technical side of being able to update quickly, having a single source of truth for your content, there's another side to that, which is your prioritization and how you respond to these new mandates that come in. When we had things like new COVID messaging coming in, or we had a lot of direct issues with talking about the 0% interest on students' loans, there were complex messages that then needed to be interpreted and moved out, and we had a large backlog of items that are going on. So how do you do that? Oftentimes, I think one of the first things that gets cut is something like usability testing. It's going back to the users. You've got a tight deadline. You just need to work, and you need to publish something. And what we found time and time again is that when we just stuck our heads down and published, just looked at the legislation that came in, or the new directive, and then published that on the site, we had poor results. We would end up with long series of texts, or we would have, if we went in and we're just working on a large audit, we would just have so many tickets. How do you prioritize those? How do you get that message out? What we've found much more useful for things like that is to be as agile as possible in terms of going back to the user. So when we're talking about, messaging banners that go off, that appear at the tops of our sites, we find that it is so incredibly useful to immediately just go back within a few days, if you have that capability, and talk to users. Do you have a panel of users that you can go back to? Have you worked through the Paperwork Reduction Act and these other constraints on your testing? And do you have a way that you can regularly go back and quickly just pull people? Can you go out on the street? We're close to Union Station, and sometimes just going out and stopping people with an iPad and getting that messaging vetted very quickly before it goes up on those sites is so useful. And it's also, I think there's a fear that going back to the users is just another step, but it can really help you prioritize. Because they will tell you what is important to you. You're going to have, if you're prepping and you're going through that audit, you're going to have a lot of findings. How do you tackle first things first? It shouldn't be your own intuition. You are not your user. You really need to go back, and they will tell you what is important to them. And that will really help you focus your resources where they need to go, get those messages short, and have something to respond back to. You're going to get these directives that are coming in, and people aren't going to want to hear that, oh, I just think this is too long, right? They're going to say, put it up on the website. But if you go, we checked in with our user base, and they are not understanding what this means. Here's some alternatives as they suggested. People don't know, what the CARES Act is, for instance, right? We're enmeshed in those kinds of words, but people know COVID. And that's what they keyed in on. Being able to go back to leadership with those kinds of findings helps you address the pain points while also responding positively to the new directives that you're getting from leadership, from the management agenda, and the other things that are going to come in soon.
Great. That's an exhaustive list. And I really love your point, though, on taking the time up front to get user feedback. And I think it is a very commonly followed practices. We don't need more opinions. It's going to slow things down. But if you can do that in that audit phase, everything else goes faster after. So I think it's a really good point to make, that it may slow things down on the front end, but long term, for the viability of this effort, it's going to pay off.
Yeah,
Tina,
and you can do it in a guerrilla fashion too. Just a day or two. Go out there. Don't be afraid.
You're speaking my language.
What's that?
I said that he's speaking your language.
I know, Tate. I was thrilled by everything you said. It was fantastic. And really, Doug, your follow-up is another point I was going to try to make, which is if you do this early, it's not expensive. The payoff is huge. Government websites do not have a great reputation with the public for being easy to understand, clear in their communications. And this is a very simple way for you to know if you're really hitting the mark. And it bleeds over into a whole lot of other improvements that you can make. We like to think of research as like you talk to people and it goes like into this institutional bank. Then your next project, you can pull from that bank and use it on whatever you're working on next. So I was very excited. Tate, that was fantastic.
Well, while we have you talking, what are some of the barriers you see?
Oh, yeah. One of the biggest barriers that we often see is just getting a team of distributed staff aligned around a common process and a vision of success. Then that allows you to have a more organized response as an agency. So before you begin, ideally, agency leadership would help you clarify what kinds of changes that need to be made on your website, and you can build a common understanding about how those changes are important to the people you serve. And this can give some ideas about how the agency can speak with a single voice. But staying organized can really help with the reporting requirements. So understanding the importance of those requirements can help motivate and align your staff as they get started.
Yeah, great point. And Tina, anything to add on barriers we haven't talked about yet?
I think when you think about it from like a website perspective, I think oftentimes what can come into play is like your software development lifecycle. And at Federal Student Aid, we're still a pretty waterfall approach when it comes to the development and release of new features, our products for our website and our mobile app. And that can lead to longer delivery cycles and a limited ability to like change course or make adjustments. And one of the things that we're starting to try to do to help us be a little more responsive is we are pilot testing the creation of an agile team. Their focus is going to be more around like improvements to the site and to the mobile app, but we're hoping that this small dedicated team that is empowered to address certain improvements within the scope of the project and have dedicated resources will allow us to improve our ability to turn over improvements to the site and hopefully also reduce the rework and sometimes testing issues we find when you kind of follow that more standard, development life cycle. And so we recognize that this is kind of like a baby step into it and that for an organization to truly embrace some of these agile approaches, it really takes a larger organizational change approach, but we are hopeful that, kind of dipping our toes in this will help kind of start to pave the way for allowing us to have a framework that lets us be more responsive to changes in the future.
Great point. And Tina, let's keep you on the hot seat here for a second. So as we kind of talk through the barriers, and we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe go a little more. When we think about this, what is the business problem agencies are trying to solve when they update their digital services, and why is this necessary?
Well, the areas are pretty. We see them as multifaceted. One of the main business problems is around kind of those we call it the customer pain points. And when you were talking about an audit, there's oftentimes a tendency to think of audit in terms of like the site or the content. But we also, when we were beginning some of the work around updating our website, we also did a kind of customer audit where we met with and got a lot of information from our customers to really identify what are their pain points when it comes to, trying to complete the tasks. Because we know that they don't come to our site for the joy of looking at a federal website. They're coming there because they need to complete a task. And so we need to figure out how we can get them as easily as possible to complete that task, and how can we reduce confusion and let them cut through the clutter And also on the agency side, how can we become more efficient in how we're managing, our resources and our ability to respond, without and allow us to be a little bit more nimble.
Makes perfect sense. And Mike and Stephen, from your, work with government agencies, what are you seeing as the business problem trying to be solved?
Well, there's kind of two levels. Oh, Stephen, do you want to go? Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that there's kind of two levels of the problem. And the minimum is what is required of us. And Tate talked to this a little while ago, that tends to be where we leave it. But over time, you're going to have to fix some other things as well. And that's why I'm really urging people to use this PMA opportunity as a chance for you to kind of begin to get organized in a bigger sense for the next surprise that you might have coming your way. Mm-hmm. So the audit is a really good way to do this. There's something we've seen with our clients is it's a simple tool, and we've outlined it. Again, the details are in the white paper, but it's a great way for you to understand the site in a broad way so that you can have better conversations with your coworkers and start to create a culture of making improvements. And, the customer audit that Tina talked to is exactly the sort of thing that can help you really improve the support that the public needs from your site. And so that's sort of the second level. Is Don't just do the minimum, because that'll come back to bite you later.
Yep.
I was just going to say.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to jump back just a little bit because something that Tina said got me thinking more along the technical lines of a barrier in place, and I guess this can be a business problem as well. Is that oftentimes we work with a government agency where they may not have a very robust modern web development workflow in place, which may not matter for the content audit or the content changes. I know that's kind of a separate process, but really just the development process. If you need to make code changes on your site, if you need to push out changes quickly, this may be a good opportunity as well to modernize those systems, to look into, more continuous integration and continuous deployment tools, to look into things like pipelines that really can help your technical team, your developers, or your software engineers push out changes faster. And then I think I cut you off, Tate.
No, not at all. Actually, I was thinking somewhat along the same lines. I think, when you think of an audit, it's often identifying all of those current issues. How do you improve cohesion going forward, and how do you speed up the development? And one of those things that we're working on implementing is parts of the U.S. web design system, and we have our own, fairly robust design system that's going in, and that does two things. One, it speeds up development of any new forms or processes. We have pages that we can just throw up, very quickly in our development cycle because we can reuse those components. And that's incredibly helpful, for the content team to know how something is going to render, and not be surprised by that or have to look into production or wait months to see high fidelity prototypes. And for those agencies or folks who are, that's kind of scary to go all the way to having your own design system. This can be as simple as working with your developers and your vendors to have a couple of components that you can put up and put down outside of your normal development cycles. If you have long ones, say quarterly or something like that, you could still, work to have an alert banner that you can turn on and off quickly, and that can start to address, very immediate needs, or even content pages that can go up and down very quickly. We have certainly been implementing that for COVID, and with our servicers, those are things that we're looking to, implement more in the future. That not all of them are ready to, jump on board a full design system, but they can implement certain components that give us much faster time to publish.
It makes perfect sense, and it kind of leads to my next question for Mike here. We're talking about audits, and it's come up a few times today, and let's just tackle it straight on. Why should audience do an audit of their current website and digital resources before launching updates? What's the two main benefits of doing that audit?
Maybe this is a good time to put up the slide that we put together. Matt, yeah. So the first part is just understanding your current state. What do you know about your website today? What does success look like for your website today? And that's your audit and review part. And then as you meet the requirements, you're sort of in step 2, creating and revising. But if you do the audit in a broader sense, that allows you to be very effective in step 3, which is as you shift to, if you all are familiar with the term content governance, this sets you up very well to have a broad understanding of what your agency publishes. It can also start you having conversations with people who are in other silos. This is another barrier that we see a lot of, is that you work in your little part and they work in their little part and you don't really talk to each other. And the public doesn't understand your website that way. So one of the reasons you'd want to do the audit is so it allows you to then pivot to some of these bigger questions that can help you down the road. So it can be a transformative part for your agency culture as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And it allows you to zoom in when you need to and zoom out bigger picture when you need to do that.
Makes sense. And this is going to be a good transition into a final question in this area for Tate. And we've talked about this a little bit, Tate, but just a little more, how can agencies better anticipate priorities and plan for them behind the scenes? So what you were talking about earlier, like, what's the level of preparation that can happen? So when something hits, whatever it may be, your agency can be, the site can be ready.
Yeah. And I think, first of all, the reality is that you're not going to be able to really anticipate it, right? And nobody anticipated COVID. We just spoke briefly with some of our GSA counterparts, and the only thing I can say about the management agenda is that it will be a little bit late in being released. So there are going to be surprises, and I think the preparation that you can do is really having a pipeline for prioritizing. And being able to reflect back what your users' priorities are. Because you're probably also going to get a lot of things, there's going to be, the agenda is going to be broad and diverse. There's going to be a lot of items. What do you tackle first? And what I hope you'll be able to do is say, okay, our users have prioritized these 3 things. These are what we should tackle first as we go through these different requirements. This is, you may, if you go through that audit, you're going to have a lot of findings. What do you tackle first? What if it gets interrupted? You really need to be able to have a minimum viable, product and goal that you're reaching towards with limited resources. We all have very limited resources. And again, I think that goes back to your users. So you really need to have a way to talk to your users. There are a lot of formal ways if you're, doing usability testing or working with vendors that do those kinds of things, but it can be incredibly informal. As long as you're talking to real folks, and you're talking to, less than 10 at a time in an informal setting, you're not running afoul of Paperwork Reduction Act or other federal regulations. You can do this in a fast, easy way. It doesn't take a lot to start it up and to just have that pipeline going, make that a regular exercise so that when you do have a question that you need to ask them, you can ask it. You can ask them quickly. You can quickly find them. If you've got partners, if you've got folks on the street, you've done it before, and that way, when the new mandate comes in and it's a fire drill, you don't have to sacrifice that aspect of it. You can quickly go back to them and go, okay, we've got these 5 things. What matters to you? And they're going to be able to tell you. And it may differ from leadership's priorities, and you're going to be able to bring that evidence back and really, again, focus on a human-centered design process and human-centered products, because people are going through, this is their lives. They have to deal with us. So we should make it as easy as possible, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Can I jump into something real quick, Doug?
Sure.
At one point, Kate was saying it's hard to know where to start. If you're not sure, if you're saying to yourself, how do I do this huge audit of our giant website? We really recommend you start with something called a rolling audit. So take your top 100, 200, some number of pages as far as traffic, and start there. Build out an inventory and audit of those pages and start looking at how those pages are performing. And then when you feel good about that, you've met the PMA requirements, you've started to get a feeling for what the user problems might be, then you can do your next sort of series of pages from that. But if you're not sure where to start, that's not a bad place to begin. Just your top visited pages.
That's great advice. And I think we're seeing some questions come in about kind of that how to tackle that. So I'd like to pivot real quick. We have another poll up here. The poll is, has your agency done a website audit? Yes, no, somewhat, or unsure. And as while you're thinking about this, we'll set up the next section of our discussion today is really about how we're going to use technology to serve constituents. So once again, has your agency done a website audit? Yes, no, somewhat, or unsure. And Maddie, if you please put the results up. All right. So I think that, the somewhat is interesting in that, perhaps people are trying to figure out how to do it, how to do one more complete. Even answers on yes and no, and a group of folks of unsure. So I think this is once again where, we can talk about using technology here to help. So let's start with my first question here. And Tina, I'm going to start with you on this question. What are some best practices to leverage your website to deliver information to constituents, citizens, whoever your agency is trying to reach? So what are some of the best practices to leverage your website?
Sure, and I'm happy to talk about an effort that we took on that began in 2019, which really looked at how we could start a major initiative to consolidate and improve the digital experience for our customers for that very reason, to look at how we could leverage best practices and make it a better experience. And the reason we took this on was because over time, Federal Student Aid had come to build different websites around different uses, such as informational content, authentication, loan management, the FAFSA form. And so we were really looking at how can we tackle this kind of disjointed experience for customers and bring it together. And so with this effort in 10 months, we were able to deliver a new website, studentaid.gov, that consolidated 4 of these websites, leveraging some of the work that you had mentioned around, doing audits of those sites and then looking at how we could bring them together. We delivered, an improved user experience with a focus on human-centered design approaches, like Kate had mentioned. And then we really started with the goal of creating a foundation for growth and expansion. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that people aren't just coming to studentaid.gov because they just love coming to our website, but they're coming to us because they need to do something. And so we really wanted to focus on how we could provide features that provide personalization and help our customers kind of cut through the noise to find what they need and to be able to quickly do it. And a couple examples are for personalization. We created a new feature called the Customer Dashboard, as well as the Notification Center. And the dashboard is a page you get to when you log into the site, and it has personalization such as a summary of the financial aid, information on upcoming payments, the status of certain forms and applications, with the goal that we can grow and expand it over time. And then with Notification Center, that serves as an alert kind of functionality where we can let users know if there's important actions related to their financial aid or other actions that they need to take. We try to focus on introducing tools such as our loan simulator that helps customers navigate the complicated process of figuring out how to establish a repayment strategy for their student loans. And finally, we leverage some new technologies to help guide customers. And a great example is we deployed a virtual assistant or a chatbot that's called Aiden. And it uses artificial intelligence and natural language processing to evaluate customer inquiries and guide them to the correct info and resources. And since we launched in December of 2019, we are continuing to provide updates on a quarterly basis. We're able to consolidate 2 more websites. And we've also taken steps to revamp our mobile app using a lot of the lessons learned from the website work. So it's been a really challenging but really exciting effort to be able to look at how we can bring some of those best practices input from users to help us improve their experience with federal student aid.
That's great. And I imagine there's a lot of user metrics that you're looking at to see the efficacy of your efforts.
Yes. Yep. We have Google Analytics implemented across the site, so we're leveraging that analytics data, and we're actually in the process of looking at implementing a tool that will allow us to do a variety of survey mechanisms, such as always on, post-transactional, via email, as well as delivered through the website, to help us also get more kind of point in time, or as customers want to provide it, input. We've also have some tracking around like American Customer Satisfaction Index, which is helping us evaluate, whether or not these improvements we're making are going to result in improved user experiences over time. So we're just starting to look at the metrics because we're continuing to roll out these products and features, but we're hoping, the data will help not only show us, how we're performing, but we're also, as Kate mentioned, they're great at making sure that we keep the customer top of mind. And so they also have a regular schedule of usability testing to ensure that as we launch features and products, we're getting immediate feedback also in terms of their usability.
Awesome. And before I jump over to Stephen and Mike, Tate, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just two quick things. One, just to emphasize what Tina said, analytics are also the voice of the user. And so it's just incredibly valuable, again, to see where folks are clicking. They are telling you directly how they're using your products, and they will tell you if they are ignoring certain links or certain elements. And that's a voice, just like talking to users, that you need to listen to very strongly. And I think the second thing that we have seen is, there's a certain tendency in government to simply provide all of the information and make it as accurate as possible. And we really have to move beyond that. It can't just be, an audit of, are we saying the same thing here or there? We really have to avoid, this choice paralysis that our users find. We have some 30 to 40 different permutations of repayment plans that users can choose from. We used to provide just a long list of the pros and cons and what your monthly payment might be for each of these items, and people ignored it. What we've moved to with something like Loan Simulator is not just providing that content, but providing a recommendation based on their financial situation and what they tell us their financial goals are. And we get that down to a single recommendation, and that is what drives action. And that's what we need. We need users to not simply, be information sponges. They don't come here to do that. They are here to actively make a choice, and we need to help them make that choice and not simply look at a wall of text and go, oh, shit, I don't want to read this. I'm not going to make that decision right now.
I hear you. Stephen, with your work with multiple government agencies, what are some of the best practices you're seeing around, how folks can leverage websites to deliver information to citizens and constituents?
Sure. I think the most important thing, the best practice I can think of is just to make sure that everyone, all of your constituents, can access that information. And that can mean a number of things. In some regards, it could be just the performance of your website. If someone's using a mobile phone on a super slow data connection, they should be able to access the information they need at that moment. Or if someone's using the fanciest, 43-inch new desktop computer, they should be able to access that information. So performance is important of your website, and you need to make sure that it is responsive across all screen sizes. Obviously, pretty much everyone thinks of that now. But just that it's fast. It doesn't have to be the fastest site on the planet, but it needs to not get in the way of your users accessing that information. And the second part of that comes to mind, is that I've already talked about it, is that you should be taking accessibility very seriously. If your constituents cannot access your information because they have a disability and you are locking them out of your website, that's a very big deal. And it needs to be thought of from the very beginning. A lot of agencies I know wait until something is built, and then they run some automated scans and they say it's passed. But you cannot say that your website is compatible with Section 508, which now points to WCAG AA guidelines without running manual tests. It's impossible. So you need to be thinking of that from the very beginning, and you don't want to wait until you hand it off to your developers and then you tell them to fix it and make it accessible. All of your staff should be trained on accessibility.
Yeah, YCAG 2.2 is on its way.
Yeah, it's coming. It always moves.
Be ready. All right, we're going to speed up a little bit because I want to make sure we have time to get through everything. So we'll do this as a speed round. We'll start with Tate first. How can technology enable easier website updates?
Yeah, this goes back to some of the things I was mentioning earlier. It's avoiding that vendor handoff whenever possible. So if there are ways that you can get outside of your development cycle or speed up your development cycle, and that's going back to those website consolidations, right? Well, and it's also going to the design system elements and components that we were talking about earlier. And a third thing that we could speak to very quickly is, we have, with our servicers, we have a lot of different sites. They're on completely different architectures. If we just give them text, they implement in completely different ways. We found that with COVID. One of the things that we did to speed up that process for them was we actually gave them components, and not just, we gave them code, as well as all the assets that they needed to implement across these different sites. And they loved it. We did not get a bunch of pushback from them. They just really appreciated that we provided what we needed on their sites, and they were able to implement in a number of different architectures. So that's something to think about as well if you're dealing with a lot of vendors and you need something up quickly but consistently.
Got it. And Mike, what's your thoughts on how tech enable easier website updating?
I think that was a question for Stephen.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. We'll leave that one to you.
Which is okay.
You're off the hook.
Yeah, well, I'll fill in if Stephen misses anything.
I think the first point that I can think of is that technology should always be serving the goals of your organization and your constituents. You shouldn't be forced into some sort of content model or technology that doesn't actually do anything for your organization. The technology should not be enforcing goals upon you. You should be deciding what your goals are first. And I think that technology can enable easier website updates, kind of what we were talking about before, by giving you a system that's built to meet the goals of your agency and how you need to work with your content. So ideally, you'll have a system that's flexible enough to be built around that and enable you to update content easily, push out changes easily. You need to be nimble. And so you can either fight your technology to do that, or you can modernize your technology and make it easier for you to push out updates quickly.
Awesome. All right, I have another question. Before I do that question, Maddie, if you want to put the poll up while I ask this question, we're going to multitask here as a team. All right, Mike, this one's for you. What is one way agencies have been better able to deliver success to constituents based on website improvements?
Sure. One thing that I'll throw in, and again, tied back to the audit process, one of the things that we have found to be super helpful is pushing the idea in the audit that each page has really a single purpose. That can be hard for some people, but you get that down to one purpose and one action you want the user to take on that page. What that allows you to do is not only focus your writing and your visual design around that task and that action, but it also lets you look at your metrics and see if people are taking that action. And this is where you get the qualitative and quantitative sides of the coin kind of working in tandem. And Tina and Tate were both sort of talking about this as well. It's really important that you're looking at your analytics and you're talking to users, and that you get them working as a set. So that's one thing that we found to be really, really helpful. It can be hard up front to get a page down to one purpose because you get pulled in a lot of different directions.
Sure.
But if you can do that, it helps you with your SEO efforts as well. Yep. So it helps you in any number of ways.
Great advice. So let's do our poll question here. Does your agency do usability testing? Yes, no, unsure. Answers, yes, 37%, no, 21%, unsure, 42%. So once again, I think there is a level of it's happening or a level of, raising the awareness of what's happening within the agencies as folks are unsure about some of the efforts going on. All right, let's get to our last part.
It's great that yes is higher than no, though. That's fantastic.
That did a few years ago. That did not used to be the case. So I'm really glad to see that people aren't feeling like you can't do this, because you can. Whether you're a federal agency or you're resource constrained in your state and local, there are ways to do this with very minimal barriers. And you, as a federal agency, I'll stress again, you can do this. There are not legal requirements around not doing this and not talking directly to your users. Really important.
Yeah, it's great feedback, Tate. All right, let's get to our last section here. We went through a lot of information. We went through it quick. And so in our wrap up here, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to just highlight, what's the one takeaway you want our audience to walk away with? So Tina, we started with you. We're going to end with you on this part. So Tina, what's your big one takeaway you'd love the audience to walk away from today's webinar with?
So one of our biggest takeaways is that you have to plan for what we call like the sprint zero. And I mentioned earlier how we had done a lot of work around that effort to consolidate and modernize our website. And we had a very aggressive schedule that assumed we could basically hit the ground running. But this was a challenge because we need a significant amount of coordination with business owners and stakeholders across our organization. We had new processes and work teams. We were shifting from traditional requirements to user stories and functional documents. And we were basically tackling a whole new project with a contractor. And our start was really difficult because we had to basically start performing right away while we were still figuring out how we got the work done. So I would just recommend that anytime you're going to tackle a new effort, no matter how big or small, make sure you allow time for that sprint zero, what I call your planning sprint. If you're working on a contract or you're developing a contract, make sure you build that into the scope of work. And that will help make sure you get the processes, the people, the plans, the schedule set before you begin the challenge of tackling your task.
Great. What's the one takeaway you want folks to go home with?
I would say just if there's something that you want to do when it's a fire drill, do it when it's not a fire drill. So for me, it's talking to your users and being able to do that on a regular basis so that you can talk to them when there's very little time. Definitely just make this part of a regular habit. It shouldn't be something that you do once a year. Talking back to your users is something that we try to do, not just during every development sprint, but regularly, time-wise, every month, so that we're validating, products that are even out there or have been out there for a long time.
Great. And my takeaway quote is, analytics is the voice of the user. I think it's just a great way that you mentioned to capture the importance of analytics and humanize what that data can do. Stephen, what do you want us to go home with?
I think kind of what I was just talking about is that technology is only one piece of website improvements. And I say that as a technology guy. The best technology in the world doesn't really matter at all if you don't have solid content. And if your visitors can't figure out how to access the information that they need when they need it. So technology should be implemented, ideally to meet the goals and needs of your organization, not the other way around.
Makes sense. All right, Mike, bring us home.
Sure. I would say get organized to understand your whole site. Making website improvements, including PMA updates, you think about it as an interdisciplinary process. And the PMA is a fantastic opportunity for you to set some of these actions in motion. And again, I'll reiterate, we often talk about website improvements like they're technical challenges. And often it's the culture that holds us back. And using the audit and talking with your users is a great way to build a culture that's responsive to what your constituents need and are looking for and are at your website to do.
That is so timely that you say that. We did a virtual summit earlier this week on modernization, and some of the survey questions always, what's the biggest hurdle? And it's always culture. It's not tech. It's building that culture to enable change and modernization. I want to thank everyone that participated today. Tina, Tate, Stephen, and Mike, thank you so much. We went through a lot of information and we really appreciate it. Went through it quick, so this archive is available for our viewers. To our folks that are viewing in today, thank you for your time. We know how busy you are. We appreciate you taking out 15 minutes of your time to spend with us to learn about some of these really important things that are happening in our space. I also want to let you have a few quick reminders. Let me read my note here to make sure I get it. We're going to email you a link to the training. You'll get that tomorrow to view the archive. Pass along the folks. The purpose of these trainings is to provide you with more information to help you do your job better, and I hope we accomplish that today. As always, if you have questions, email us at info@government.com. But once again, thank you to our awesome speakers. Thank you to our awesome community for coming out today. We appreciate you. Have a great day, and we'll see you around the block next time. Thanks, everybody.
That was great. Thanks a lot, Doug. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.